Welcome to The Art of Discernment, a podcast where professors from across the Masters University discuss current events and higher education from a biblical worldview.
Well, hello and welcome to The Art of Discernment. I am Dr. Bob Dixon, and with me this morning is Dr. Jordan Morton of the Pearl Schaeffer School of Education. Dr. Morton, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's great.
So what we're going to be talking about today is in the context of K through 12 education. And I'm going to jump right in because there's a question that I've been dying to ask you for almost a year. And here it is. In light of this last year's events, specifically the lockdown, what would you say students have lost? And more importantly, how can we get it back?
That's a really good question. We've been wrestling around with that. Certainly in the K-12 realm, there's been discussion of learning loss, where students are not quite academically where they would have been if we had been proceeding with school as normal. Now, that's not across the board, and that's not every student, but we do have to take that into consideration. And college students are facing the same kind of scenario, as you know. But also, I think there's even more importantly, a social-emotional learning loss. They haven't had the same kind of social community experiences, and that's produced some trauma in students, I think. So they're suffering with lockdown and with all the other things that they've had to do, Zoom school, or some kind of disruption to what they perceived as normal and what their parents perceived as normal. So there's been a lot of family challenges that they've had to face. So it's really a complicated issue.
For teachers who are now maybe in some parts of the country anyway, starting to welcome students back into the classroom, what can they expect from their students?
Well, what we've been telling our student teachers who are in this right now, and our master teachers as well with our district partners and our friends, is to really take a step back from the content right now, because students are coming into school. If they've been out, sometimes they've been out for an entire year. It's been a calendar year since they've been in a school. They need to treat those students as if this is day one of school all over again. And some of them are very young and they haven't been to school at all. This is the only school experience they've known. So the younger the student, especially, it's very important to take a step back from the content and really work on building community in the classroom, getting a relationship going with your students. It's different when they're in person, and we know that. So we have to really sort of kind of take a step back and start with those things. Teaching is very relational work, and we have to remember that. So we have to welcome the students back and make it a place of acceptance and love, and a really place where the students look forward to coming, and then we can get back into the content.
Now, I know the data is not really even being collected yet, or just only beginning to be collected. But at this early stage, do you think you could even speculate on what maybe we might have learned in the field of education this year?
Well, the good thing is we have learned some things. It's forced educators to think about what really is the basic foundational building blocks of teaching and learning. What are the non-negotiables? What is really important when you strip away the programs, when you strip away the facilities, when you strip away some of the technology, and then you have to add it back? What really is the foundational components of teaching and learning? And so it's really forced us to go back to basics in some sense. And it comes down to relationship. It's discipleship that really makes a difference. So that's kind of what we've been learning. What this whole experience has exposed is some of the inequality and inequity in the schooling system that we knew was there. It's really come to the forefront. The haves and the have-nots that's been exacerbated by this situation. So we have to, as a society, come to grips with that and decide what we're going to do.
I'm glad you brought that up. I wondered that all year. You know, crises tend to exacerbate cracks in foundations and things like that. And I wondered if that was, would be certainly not positive in the short term, but if we're paying attention, at least potentially positive in the long run if we can recognize it.
Sure. I think that the importance is to recognize what really the issues are that are faced by different population groups in our school system. I know people probably have seen on the news or online different school districts or different schools wrestling with how to get internet access for students who do not have that, issuing hotspots. People got creative and put hotspots into school buses and drove them around town so that students could park. We've all seen sort of the stories of the student, the family gets in the minivan and drives to the Taco Bell because that's where the Wi-Fi is, that kind of thing where you don't have that at home. So how on earth are you supposed to engage with your teacher on Zoom school if you can't even get online and you only have one computer for 5 or 6 kids? That kind of thing is really starting to become apparent. And districts have had to, and schools have had to really adjust what they've done and figure out ways to serve those students. And then, of course, there are students with special needs that really have not been served very well at all with this whole lockdown and the different modalities of schooling. So we've had to take a step back and figure out how we serve those students too.
The thing I always heard, growing up and certainly growing into the teaching field was, you're going to have to learn to adapt and use technology in the classroom, and to various degrees, that of course has always been happening. But we got a shove in 12, 14 months ago. How much of that do you think will stick? Will we keep Zoom in classrooms, or how does that work?
So I guess that's going to be an interesting thing to see going forward. How much of the technology will we rely on in the classroom? Certainly, even school districts and schools that are, quote, going back to the classroom, there are some who are going back in a hybrid model where some of their students will be in the classroom, but some will still continue to Zoom. So the teacher is going to have to do that delicate dance of roomies, the people in the room, and Zoomies who are on Zoom and figure out how to teach both groups simultaneously. So that's been a model that's been in higher ed. I don't know, how well that's going to translate down to K-12. And certainly there are different sort of technological applications that you can get that might prove useful. But what I don't think we want is to just say, okay, everyone come into a room and now everybody open your laptop and look at it for 6 hours. That's not the purpose of coming back to school. There's more to it than that. So I think it remains to be seen how much technology will still play a role. And I do think that teachers who have found success with that will be able to carry over some of those applications into actual brick and mortar schooling, if you will. But, it was a shove. It was a crash course. It was emergency, instruction. And I'm not sure that was the best way to sort of plot educational improvement or,
It was like triage.
It was definitely, I have to do this and what am I doing? And, really crisis intervention took over, and teachers are resilient. They manage to find ways. But, how much of that will carry on? We'll see. There are students who found more success with virtual schooling than I think maybe we would have expected. They liked it. They found, it met their needs. It met the family needs. So how many districts will continue that as an option, even if it's sort of a separate program and maybe not the hybrid roomies and Zoomies? We'll have to see how that goes. But I know certainly that there are several districts who are thinking that might be a more permanent option for students.
Well, I mean, teachers have always been adapters and
improvise, adapt, and overcome.
That's it. Yeah,
isn't that the SEAL team motto? That's what we say.
Yeah, and when the dust settles, look back and say, okay, that worked. I'm going to use that again. That didn't work. Forget it next semester or next year.
Exactly.
And so, if anyone is equipped to juggle these new paradigms, it would be teachers, I would think.
I think so. I mean, part of it we teach our people is that you've got to be expecting the unexpected. I just don't think anyone expected this.
No.
This was not on anyone's radar. We've had unexpected events happen before. Certainly, there's been tragedies. There's been natural disasters. Riots. There's been fires. There's been floods. We can maybe even sort of grasp that, but this, where we did not have schooling as we knew it for an entire calendar year, I don't think that was on anybody's radar, and that's not in anybody's playbook. So we've really seen sort of creative bursts of energy and teachers having to sort of make it up and figure it out and band together to do that.
I'm not one to fall into, get in line to read a bunch of academic journals. It's never my favorite source of reading, but I have to say I am really looking forward to the next year or two of publishing in that arena, because there's going to be a lot of data that's being looked at, and I'm very curious to see what we find out.
I think we'll start to see that come out pretty soon. There's been lots of people doing research even as we go, and we'll see what this turns into. I think we'll see what the long-term solutions are. The longitudinal studies will start happening, the short-term, and we'll just have to see what happens after that.
So, Dr. Morton, you're a mom.
I am.
I'm a dad.
You are.
So I feel in a good position to ask this question to you. What do you say to parents whose kids went through this, and what can they do to help their sons and daughters be prepared for going back to school?
So that's a very good question. We've been talking about this as well. Certainly, I should also mention my husband is a teacher, so he's faced the prospect of going back to school pretty quickly here. And he's a music teacher, so you can even imagine what his year has been like. Try to teach band and orchestra through Zoom. It's fascinating. We've been talking a lot about this, and I understand parents are concerned, and I totally get that because I'm a mom. I, will walk through fire to protect my son. But at the same time, I also have to take a step back and realize that I am the grown-up in this situation. So I need to be a model on how to deal with the stresses and the crises as they come. So my advice to parents is pretty simple. Know your student. You know them better than anybody else. You know them better than the teacher. You know them better than their friends. You should be in communication with your student. You should prepare them to go back, not to scare them, but to prepare them for what they might face and open that conversation early, realizing that what they're walking into is a situation that's different. It's been different for this whole year. Now it's going to be different again. So the best that we can do is encourage our children, keep the conversation open, and let them know what it's going to be like. So get in touch with the teacher. What can they expect to see on the first day of school? What can your children expect to see for the first week of school? What's it going to be like? And then work with your child and prepare them for that. Make them excited to go back to school. And I think that's going to be important. Yes, there's going to be concerns. I totally understand that. But they should be your concerns as a parent, and you should not put those on your children. Mm-hmm. So the best we can do is help our children navigate the situation by try to help them understand what they're going to get themselves into. What is it going to be like? And try to help them be encouraged to go back. Be excited to go see their friends. Be excited to learn something new. Talk with the teacher to see what's it going to be like, and then prepare your children for that.
That's great. My girls are one's graduated, one's a student here at Masters. So I'm just past that stage, but I've got friends who've got younger kids, and I will make sure they listen to that advice. That's really good advice.
Good.
Talk a bit about the importance of the teacher-parent relationship in this whole thing.
It's very crucial. We, as teachers, we're partners with parents. We're not the ones that are the experts lording it over parents, and certainly we don't claim to know the students as well as the parents do. So our advice to our young people that are going to become teachers is always work with your parents. That communication has to be clear. We like proactive communication. And if you're a parent and you're listening to this and you think, my teacher hasn't reached out to us, then you reach out to them and extend that open door to say, we're here to support one another. We're here to work with you. How can we do that? So it's really important to be honest, upfront, but also kind on both sides. Understand that teachers are under a lot of stress. Teachers understand that parents are under a lot of stress. It's really easy to lose sight of the most important thing in that relationship, which is the student, the child.
Right.
So if we're all on the same page and we all communicate well and put the child in the center and their needs, educational needs in the middle of that, that's really good. And that really makes for a strong community of education.
Okay, now I have another question that's been on my mind for a while.
Okay.
And it's because I live on the teacher side of it, and so do you, but you live in all three of these worlds. You live on the teacher side,
True.
the parent side, you live on, and the teacher of teachers side as well. with technology, students have so much more access to their teachers. And my question is, what should the level of interaction, what should the expectation be for that level of interaction between the teachers and the students with regard to technology? I mean, just to clarify, when I was a kid, when I was growing up, if I want to talk to my teacher, it was in class,
in person,
or even, at the high school or college level, I could make an appointment or, but now it's 24 hours, with the thing in your pocket. So, what should the level of expectation should be in that arena?
So what we tell what I told my son and what I tell, students is the teacher is not your friend on social media. That's not, instant messaging or, Snapchat or any of those kinds of things where it's virtually synchronous communication 24 hours a day. That's not going to be realistic. I mean, this is a teacher. They're a professional. And that's the same thing I tell parents. You may send an email, give the teacher 24 hours to respond to that. And the same thing for students. Students now have their own email accounts to the school district and everything is done virtually. Some teachers just receive assignments through email or through Google Classroom. So that's becoming very common for students to communicate with teachers electronically. But it's still important to recognize the role of the teacher in the difference between a friend and a teacher. The teacher is a professional that's there to guide you and to teach you. So students and parents need to really understand their relationship is a professional one. And if it veers outside of that, then it's just not really good for anyone. So what we tell our potential teachers is give yourself some boundaries to say, I will respond within 24 hours. And for students especially, it's important to keep it very professional and always loop in the parents for all of that too. Older students, I think that they can do it by themselves. I can talk to my teacher by myself. But, it's important for parents to be kept in the loop as well. So my advice is even if a teacher is going to email back and forth with a student to CC the parent, just so that everyone is clear on what's being talked about.
Good. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. So I just have a couple more questions for you. One is really broad, and that is, what do you perceive to be maybe the biggest threat or some of the threats to education moving forward, or biggest challenges, maybe is a better way to put that?
Well, certainly we're facing a huge teacher shortage. Although I heard someone say the other day, it's not really a teacher shortage. It's a shortage of master's degree level professionals that will work for low pay and long hours. So there's that. Okay. But we are facing a teacher shortage in the country and certainly in California and specifically. So that's going to be a challenge to find people whose calling it is to do this work and to step up and go out and do that. That's probably the biggest challenge that we're going to find. We want high quality people in the classroom with our students. So as a society, as a state, we're going to have to figure out how we do that. How do we attract the best and the brightest to this field?
Okay, I said I only had a couple more questions, but you just spurred a new question from me. I can't help myself. You said the word calling, and when I hear that, I think specifically about where we're sitting right now here on the campus of the Masters University and the students that you have. And I think about the philosophy of education that we have and what it means to be a teacher and be a Christian. Talk a bit about the calling specifically for a Christian student who wants to become a teacher or a Christian teacher.
So it's very deep. A calling is very deep, and it has to come from the Lord. It can't be just a whim like, well, today I think I'll be a teacher, or I think I'll be a doctor, or I think I'll be an attorney, or I think I'll be a mom. You have to have a calling for what you're really in tune with, and God will reveal that to you. But it takes a lot of study and prayer to understand what that means. We teach our people that want to become teachers that it's a professional ministry of service. You are laying your life out on display for all to see. You have to be a role model. You have to live what your gospel training tells you to do. There's a lot of things that come into that calling. And at the heart of it is an undying love for people. You have to love your students. You've got to love them. And we know what that means. Sometimes that means sacrifice. Sometimes that means heartache. Sometimes that means, when you're tired, you have to get up and do it anyway. There's lots of times where, it takes everything that you have, but then God gives you more. So, you can't pour out of an empty cup. So part of what we say is you first have to fill your cup with everything that the Lord is going to give you. And then you can go from there. But you really have to be sure that this is your calling, because it does take a lot.
So when you're in your classrooms and you've got room full of college freshmen, sophomores, or just at the beginning of this journey, what do you tell them? Do you tell them what you just told me?
I do. We tell them to pray a lot. We tell them to search the scriptures. We tell them to figure things out about what their giftedness is, about what they think God is calling them to do. Sometimes it may be simple, like, do you like younger kids or older folks? Let's start with that. Where do you see yourself? Where are you, feel like your strengths are? What about your dispositions? There's those sort of undefinable qualities that teachers sometimes have, their emotional fortitude and, discernment and things like that. We have to really get young people to understand what the job is and what does it entail and what does it demand of you. And then we start asking them to pray and ask them to search the scriptures and to really commit their walk to the Lord so that they can really be sure that this is what they are called to do, not just what they think they might want to do.
So you must get some really wonderful notes and emails back from students who are out in the field and sharing what's going on in their classrooms.
It's amazing to us to see how God uses people he puts in places, things that we could never have planned on, or things that we could never have foreseen. But there are students that are out there making a difference, one child at a time. And I don't know any other better way to spend your life than making a difference with one child at a time. So those are some of the stories we get to hear, is the young people that go out from this program and they go into their own classroom and they start their teaching career and they actually see themselves making a difference in the life of a child. When that light bulb goes on, there's nothing better. And that's what keeps you going. And those are the kinds of stories we like to hear about. Lives have been changed because teachers have come out from this university. Lives have been changed.
I love it. Will you share some of those with me sometime? I'd love to read those.
Absolutely.
I would be really encouraged. So here's my last question, and it really fits nicely with what you just said. And that would be, if you had to pick 1, 2, 3 characteristics or habits of a good teacher, of an effective teacher, what would they be?
Well, we have to start with the fruit of the Spirit. You have to have that. You've got to have patience. You've got to have all of the fruit of the Spirit. Love. You have to know what those are, and you have to be able to cultivate that. You have to be able to allow God to plant that into you. So that's really important. And then the other things are sort of practical. It really helps to be kind of organized. There's a lot going on. I think teachers make 425 decisions a day. So you have to have some discernment about what you're going to do. You have to have a plan. You are the sort of tour guide for learning. You've got to chart the course. You've got to do all of the prep work, and you've got to actually get the kids to come along. You've got to motivate them. So there's lots of things that come into this job besides just knowing your content. But the good news is a lot of that can be directly gifted to you from the Lord.
Well, Dr. Morton, this has been a genuine pleasure for me to hear from you and learn from you, and I hope it was for our listeners as well. Thank you so much for coming this morning.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Discernment. For more information on the Masters University, visit masters.edu. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We'll see you next time.